So I'm going to start letting folks in, and I will introduce Dora Faye shortly.
The recording has started, it said.
Okay.
Yep.
Program, game on.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here at Words Writers Southwest Stories. We've just been talking to our guest, and Elizabeth and I'm Dora Faye Hendricks. Elizabeth and I have been talking to our guest, and we're excited about this program. So I want you guys to get settled in, and we're going to hear history, and we're going to hear about local people and families and togetherness and maybe some problems. I don't know, but it's going to be a nice story. Bye, families.
Okay, Dora Faye, do you want me to begin? Is that my cue?
Oh, sorry. I was just letting folks filter in a little bit.
Let me know when I should share my screen and go forward.
Yeah, we sure will. We sure will.
Unclear. It was unclear.
Yeah. That might be a good cue for me to get started. Usually we watch the attendance count kind of tick up before we.
I can't see it from here though, right?
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's program. I am Elizabeth Rudrud, and I'm the Executive Director at the Southwest Seattle Historical Society. It's a pleasure to welcome you for tonight's program. Words Writers Southwest Stories is a free monthly speaker series that highlights local authors, historians, and voices to foster a deeper understanding of our community and its people. This program is supported by Humanities Washington and from sustained support from For Culture and the Office of Arts and Culture. Their generosity makes these free experiences possible. If you'd like to learn more about the Southwest Seattle Historical Society or about the Log House Museum here at Alki Beach, you can visit us at loghousemuseum.org. And we will leave time for your questions at the end of tonight's program. If they occur to you through the program, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your question, and we'll get to as many as we can at the conclusion of tonight's program. And with that, I will pass it along to Dora Faye Hendricks, who is the chair of Words Writers Southwest Stories.
I love being the chair of this program, but today I had computer problems and I still have computer problems. So I don't have my introduction for Karen in front of me. So Elizabeth, you said you could take care of that?
Oh, sure can. I sure can. Yeah, let me get that.
I'll be back to help with the questions and answers later.
Great, and Karen Treiger is a fifth-generation Seattleite. Born in Seattle, Karen lived in Seward Park for the last 37 years and loves to bike, hike, and water ski. She attended Mercer Island High School, University of Washington, Barnard College, and NYU Law School, where she served as the editor-in-chief of the NYU Law Review. Although her career was practicing law in Seattle, she left her law practice in 2015 to write a book about her in-laws, Sam and Esther Goldberg's survival in Poland during World War II under Nazi rule. The book, My Soul is Filled with Joy, A Holocaust Story, was published in 2018 and won the PNWA Nancy Pearl Book Award for Best Memoir and the Bronze Medal in World History from the Independent Publishers Association. Karen's new book, Standing on the Crack, The Legacy of 5 Jewish Families from Seattle's Gilded Age, was supposed to be published in mid-August by Epicenter Press. Karen is married to Dr. Sheldon Goldberg, has 4 children, and is thrilled to have, well, now 7 grandchildren. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, we just got that update, so there's a new one here. So 7 grandchildren.
There's 7 grandchildren. It's a little crazy. And 3 of them are downstairs making a lot of noise, so hopefully they won't bother us. I'm just going to turn this into a slideshow, hopefully. It's not going to work. 1 second. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Dora Faye and Elizabeth. And I can't tell you how happy I am to be here, because this book that I've been working on for 4.5 or so years is finally come into the world. It feels like a birthing process to bring it to all of you and to everybody in the world. And now it is out. Publication date was 3 days ago. So there you go. It's very exciting. And I'm really specifically excited to share this story with folks who are interested in Southwest Seattle, or as we people who grew up in Seattle call it, West Seattle's interest. Because one of the families, I love, first of all, I love Alka Beach and I love West Seattle. But one of the families, the Friedlander family, lived in West Seattle and have quite an interesting history there. So thank you all for coming. And I really hope that what I'm going to share with you tonight or this evening inspires you. Actually, I want to inspire you all to become your own family storytellers, because I became my family's storyteller, and it has been very invigorating and very, it has transformed me into a person who understands my place in history better. I understand those who came before me. And of course, and I have 4 children and now 7 grandchildren, which, it's amazing. And so I can see the future, but I also now really, really see the past. And I traced my ancestors back to Europe and to their families in Europe, and then how they got to America, how they got to Seattle, which is it's a whole really super interesting story of how our families ended up in Seattle. And the story, the book really started out from a place of grief, which is a strange place to start a story. But that is actually what happened to me. My dad, Erwin Treiger, who was a well-known attorney in Seattle and a leader in the Seattle civic community, as well as Seattle's Jewish community, died in 2013. And he always wanted to write the family history. And he'd been saving all these different things, scraps of this and newspapers and photos and different things in these files. And they were in the back of his condominium in a cupboard. And after he died, I pulled them out and I started looking through them. And I was completely inspired to dig further and to go deeper. And that started my journey. And then what hit me very quickly was this idea that, wow, so many things had to happen for me, Karen Treiger, to be born in Seattle, Washington in 1961. Now you know my age, 1961. People had to leave Europe, decide to leave Europe. That was a crazy decision. Cross the Atlantic, cross the continent, decide to marry and have children and settle in Seattle. These are all crazy things that happened to then have me be born. And I think each and every one of us has this exact story for ourselves. If you think about how we came to be, so many different things had to happen. And I invite you to think about that and to think about your family history. And if you aren't already your family historian, to become that, because it will enrich your own life. It will help others as well. Your family will really be happy that you did the work, but it will enrich you, and it grounds me in my place in time in history. And that's really something very special. So the 5 families that I researched each ended up in Seattle, Washington. And I'm gonna tell you, so because I want to make sure there's time for questions. And so I'm going to try to keep my presentation to about 35 minutes. So I'm only going to share in depth the story of 2 families, the Singerman family, which was the first family that came to Seattle in 1874, and the Friedlander family, which is the one that has its deep connection to West Seattle. But before I do that, I just want to say that family research history, this is like a crazy slide, I know, but like, for me, this tells a lot about what family history research does. It is extremely introspective. We look into our own minds and into our own selves. And that is really, really what happened to me. I had to take a deep dive into myself. It was like a therapy session with myself about like, how did I become who I am? And then what did I pass on to my children and now to my grandchildren? So the introspective nature of family research history I experienced it, and it's really powerful. So I want to share that with you because I guess I hope that either you are involved in it or you will be. I want to also say that my history, because I was born in Seattle and I'm a 5th generation Seattleite, my history was outside my doorstep. And I went downtown to Pioneer Square and found all the places of different stores that my ancestors had. And then as they moved northward along First Avenue and then eastward along the Pike Street corridor, which is still actually our retail corridor. I had and then the residential neighborhoods, primarily the Central District and Capitol Hill, which we'll talk about why that happened. Had to do with, spoiler alert, had to do with discrimination. But this picture I'm showing you right now is a picture of a home that was built in 1905 by my very first ancestors that came to Seattle, Paul and Jenny Singerman. They built it in 1905. And this beautiful home is now an inn. So any of us could actually stay overnight there. And I did actually stay overnight there about a year ago. I slept in my great-great-grandparents' bedroom. That was crazy experience for me. But this beautiful building was built in 1905 by my great-great-grandparents. And it's stunning and it's still there. It's a landmark building. So it's not going anywhere. I went and visited with my mom. This is my mom, Betty Lou Treiger, who's turning 90 on Sunday. Happy birthday, Mom. It's very exciting. And when I went there, this was the home of her grandmother, whose name was Belle, who she was very close with. And as I was looking around the house and feeling the presence of my great-grandmother, Belle, who I knew as a child, I felt like I was no longer researching history. I was actually living it. And as I was living it, I felt these people who are long dead kind of come back to life and course through my veins and bring me back to a life and a time in the early 1900s that, of course, I never experienced myself, being born in 1961. But it was really an incredible experience. And I felt that throughout all of my research, both out in the streets of Seattle, as well as just sitting in front of my computer, doing the work. The 5 families that I share in the book, they were all merchants. They were all Jewish merchants who immigrated from Europe to the United States and then to Seattle. They shaped Seattle's merchant culture. They were part of originally the Pioneer Square center of Seattle's history. And then as the retail core moved north and then east, as I mentioned, they moved with it. They saw the future and they were part of making that shift happen in our city of Seattle. They were also very, very, shall we say, intent on providing incredible customer service. So like what you and I might call Nordstrom's service, like the ultimate service that we all love at Nordstrom's. It was what they did before Nordstrom's was around. They had dry goods stores, they had menswear stores. There was a wholesale millinery operation, jewelry shops. My Treiger grandparents had a mom and pop store in the Central District, and they were involved both in the civic community of Seattle as well as helping to create a very vibrant Jewish community, which I am the benefactor of that today. I want to take one step back before I dive into the families and just share with you, because a lot of people, I actually didn't even have a full understanding of how did Jews and when did Jews come to America. Pause to note that American Jews are 2% of the American population, which is really quite small. And given all the concern about Jews in America and the anti-Semitism that's going on right now, it's important to note that Jews are only 2% of the American population, which is quite small. But we started out even smaller because in the colonial times till 1820, there were only 3,000 Jewish people in the United States. From 1820 to 1880, another 150,000, mostly young men and women, mostly men, honestly, including Paul Singerman, who came from Germany and also what was then the Russian Empire, which was a huge swath of what we now call Europe. Between 1880 and 1924, we had 2 million Eastern European Jews leave the continent and come to America. And I had the rest of my ancestors came during that period of time. There's another wave of Jewish immigration which happened after World War II. Those Holocaust survivors that came to America, that's the fourth wave. About 150,000 came between 1945, the end of World War II, and 1955. And just to note that my most beloved in-laws, Sam and Esther Goldberg, who were Holocaust survivors, that was the first book that I wrote, was about their survival story. They came during that period. They arrived in 1949. So I have family that came in the fourth wave, but it's my husband's family. My family all came in wave 2 and 3. And before I get into the specific stories about the Singerman family and the Friedlander family, because I'm using them kind of to show you the examples of what occurred to these families, I'm going to just introduce you to the other ones, because I think wherever they are in heaven or beyond, that they'll be mad at me if I don't at least introduce you to them. Before I introduce you to them, I also want to pause and note that the immigration stories that I share in the book and that I'll share tonight, they are Jewish immigration stories. But these immigration stories have also universal impact. We are all immigrants to the United States. Everybody has a story of coming from somewhere, whether it's Europe or Africa or Latin America or South America, like wherever you come from, you came here, and your story is an immigrant story. And I think that these stories are particular, but universal. So I want to just say that, because as I go through them and share some with you, I'm hoping that you'll hear echoes of your own family and your own immigration story of what happened here, no matter what religion and what nation and what continent your family came from. So, so why did they come? That's an important question of like, why, especially in that third wave, why did 2 million Jewish people come to the United States from Europe? Well, it's not that hard to understand when you look at the situation that they encountered in Europe. There was terrible persecution. There was famine there. There was economic hardships. But the Jews had particular economic hardships because there were extra taxes put on the Jewish community. There were restrictions about what professions they could enter, whether or not they could marry. In some places, only one male from every family could enter into a marriage. The other men were not allowed. They were not allowed to own land, except for a very, very few exceptions. Many men, and you hear this, everybody, we left because we were worried about our sons being conscripted into the Tsar's army. They were the Jewish men, as opposed to non-Jewish men who were conscripted at 18 and kept for 3 or 4 years. The Jews were conscripted at age 12, and they were kept until age 25. And the reason for that was that the Tsar's Christian empire wanted to separate these Jewish boys from their Jewish heritage and indoctrinate them into a Christian life and a Christian world. And so Jewish families were, not shockingly, very worried about that happening to their sons. And there were many pogroms in the 1880s, and the United States ended up having this like patina of this idea of a golden Medina, and that means like the golden country. So people would write letters back to Europe who came and tell about the place that they lived in and how great it was, and you should all come here. But I think none of it could have happened, any of the immigration that happened between, like, let's say 1850 and 1950, without the transportation revolution that happened all over the world. Railroads were planted everywhere and became an operation where people could move thousands and thousands of people very long distances, and steamships could actually carry hundreds of people at a time across the Atlantic. And without the transportation revolution, these vast immigration waves would never have happened. Okay, now I'll introduce you to the families I'm not going to talk about tonight. This is Victor Stadtker, who came from Meerschingen, Germany, arriving in the United States in 1885, New York, ended up in Seattle in 1905. It's a fascinating story of how he got to Seattle and what he did here. You can read that in the book. Here's his wife, Ada Bonner, née Stataker, who has 4 children. The one girl with the bow on her head, that's my maternal grandmother, whose name was Elizabeth. I know we have Elizabeth here who's part of the story tonight. So another Elizabeth. This is my father's maternal grandparents, Chaim Leib and Chaya Tzivia Steinberg, who came from what was then Russia, but now is part of Belarus, not far from Minsk. They came in 1910 and 1911. He came first, and then she came with the 5 children. They came together. My grandmother, their youngest child, was 7 years old when she immigrated to the United States. This is my father's paternal grandparents, Treiger, Yisrael Aryeh and Tilly Treiger. They came to Portland, directly to Portland, because they had some relatives there in 1911. And then Tilly came with the 5 children in 1913. And the book includes, I really did a deep dive into Portland's Jewish history, which was super interesting for me. And I hope super interesting for people who read the book, because I didn't know anything about the history of Portland's Jewish community before this. And so now I want to just step into the story of Paul Singerman. Paul came from Raski, Russia, which is now in northeastern Poland, came to the United States in 1867 and went across the continent in a covered wagon. Like, who has ancestors that crossed in a covered wagon? Like, if you were all in this Zoom room, I'd have you raise your hand. But I imagine there might be a few, but not too many. He arrived in Seattle in 1874. When he arrived in New York, we all think about Ellis Island as like the place where immigrants came through, but Ellis Island wasn't a thing in 1867. It was a place called Castle Gardens, which was the port of entry for all immigrants into New York at that time. He ended up in San Francisco, which of course was the big city on the West Coast. There were 150,000 people that lived in San Francisco, 16,000 Jews. There was a huge Jewish community. And it was there that Paul met a bunch of Jewish merchants, and they ended up partnering with Paul to come up to Seattle, this new pioneer town, and try out selling the merchandise. And it went great. And so he ended up settling here for real in 1867. And this is what Seattle looked like in 1878. This is Pioneer Square, friends, in 1878. It was dirt streets. All the buildings were built of wood, of course, because we had so much wood, and Henry Yesler's wood mill was the main employer of the town, and wooden sidewalks with stores and things. And I love this picture because it just tells you what Seattle looked like at the time. Now, this picture, my great-great-grandfather, Paul Singerman, had ultimately 11 mercantile stores. This was store number 3, which was on what we call now First Avenue South, between like Washington and Main, if you know Pioneer Square area. In those days, First Avenue was not called First Avenue. It was called, on the south side, south of Yesler, it was called Commercial. And front of Yesler, it was, north of Yesler, it was called Front Street. And it was really divided. It was divided by Henry Yesler's sawmill. And you had to go around Henry Yesler's sawmill to get from one side of Seattle's downtown to the other side of Seattle's downtown. That all changed, of course, after the Great Fire. We'll get there in a few minutes. But I love that Paul Singerman made this sign, San Francisco store, with like dollar signs for the S's. I just think it's wonderful. But then this is a picture of Seattle. Actually, you can see at if you look down the middle of the picture, that's Henry Yesler's sawmill. And you can see how the road like ends there. You had to go around it to get to the other side of downtown. So it's a really great picture for that. But it's also a great picture to show that Paul Singerman said, this store is too small, and he moved across the street. And you can see the San Francisco store sign attached now to this brand new building, which was Seattle's very first theater. It's called the Squire Opera House, built in 1880. And he had the first floor as a retail space. And inside, it was this gorgeous, I haven't seen the inside, but it was described as a really gorgeous theater, Seattle's first real theater that rivaled the theaters of San Francisco at the time. And you also have this beautiful photo. I got these in the University of Washington photo archives of downtown Seattle from Beacon Hill in 1881. It really shows what Seattle looked like at the time. And I love this picture for the feelings and topography that it conveys to us. Now, my great-great-grandfather, Paul Singerman, ended up getting bigger and bigger spaces. And this was store number 6, which was on the other side of Henry's Sawmill on Front Street and First and Columbia, what we would call First and Columbia. Right now, there's a super ugly gray parking garage where this gorgeous building used to be. And it was a 5-story building. It was the first store in Seattle to have an elevator. It had electric lights. It had telephones. It was very, very modern. And it was gorgeous. And also, this is another picture of the same store. This is July 4th. So this is this parade downtown. This picture I love because it also conveys like what was Seattle like in 1888. You can see what it kind of felt like. The store with the banners on the end, the one at the very end, that's Paul Singerman's store, San Francisco store, or also called Toklas and Singerman's store. And yeah, this is just a wonderful picture of what Seattle was like in those days. The streets still dirt. Let's just note that it didn't get paved at this time in 1888. So imagine when it rained in Seattle. It couldn't have been a very pretty sight on these dirt streets, but whatever. We have paved streets now. But then, of course, the fire happened. We all know about the Great Seattle Fire, June 6, 1889. This photo that I found in the University of Washington archives notes that it's 30 minutes after the fire began. And you can see everyone running towards the flames and towards the smoke because everyone's going to try to put out the fire. But they were not successful. And all of downtown burnt to the ground, including my great-great-grandfather's store. Everything burnt to the ground. There was nothing left. But they rebuilt. Seattle rebuilt itself. Paul Singerman rebuilt another store, not 5 stories, but 6 stories in the same place, opened up exactly 1 year later, which was a great marketing ploy, to be honest, June 6th, 1890, and did a great job of doing that. And he ended up having more stores. He kind of downsized. He sold. I don't know why. I tried to research exactly what happened, but he sold his interest in this big store to his partner and ended up opening a men's clothing store, much smaller. But he ended up having 3 or 4 more stores moving northward down towards Pike. And then like his last big store was on 2nd and Pike. So he ended up seeing the future of downtown being in the Pike area because Pike Place Market opened in 1907. And that really then brought a lot of retail and merchants down to that part of town. The Singerman family, Paul married a woman named Jenny Orbach, who was the sister of one of his San Francisco partners. And they married in San Francisco. She came from Kempen, Prussia, which is Germany. And they had 3 children, Isidore, Louis, and Belle. And Belle was my great-grandmother, who I knew, and she died when I was, I don't know, maybe around 7 or so. I'm not exactly sure, around 7. And wait, I want to show you a picture of Belle. This is a great picture of Belle when she was around 16 years old. She was in the first confirmation class of Temple de Hirsch. Temple de Hirsch, and I'll go back to this slide because I want to share some of Seattle's Jewish history. You can see in the slide, I don't have to read it all for you. You can read it. But the important thing I want to share is that the first synagogue was not created until 1889. So because you need like enough Jewish people to like sustain a synagogue. And the synagogue actually built this incredible building on 8th and Seneca. And but this particular synagogue didn't last long. 2 other synagogues really took their place. Bikur Cholam, which was an Orthodox synagogue in 1891, and then Temple de Hirsch, which was 1899. In between when that Ohevet Shalom, that big building I just showed you, and Temple de Hirsch, we have the Alaska Gold Rush, which really invigorated Seattle's economy. And some people argue, I've read articles and books stating that they feel that the Alaska Gold Rush was the beginning of Seattle's economic prosperity that we still experience today. So you can believe that or not believe it, but I did read it in a couple of articles and books. And I just want to note that from the time that Paul Singerman arrived in 1874 until he died in 1915, Seattle's population, the white settler population, not talking about the natives that lived here, which there were, of course, we all know many. There were 1,500 white settlers, and they grew to 285,000. And the Jewish community grew from 50 to 5,000. So you can see like Seattle is just growing and growing and growing. And it continued to grow into this city that we know and love today. So I want to just jump and show you this beautiful picture of Belle, my great-grandmother, with 6 of her great-grandchildren. That's me, the little girl on the left with the buttons. That is me at probably around age 6, sitting with my brother Louis and Kenneth, and the other side are my cousins, the Goldfarbs, Susan, Stephen, and David. And that's our great-grandmother, Belle Singerman, Friedlander. She married a Friedlander. So we get into the Friedlander story directly. I love this picture. Before I get into the Friedlander story, though, I do want to just pause and note that the Jews who came here in the very early days really didn't experience discrimination. The discrimination was sadly focused on natives, Chinese, and Japanese. But really by the 1920s, you had tremendous amount of discrimination against Jewish people. Quotas for universities, including the University of Washington, only would allow a certain number of Jewish students. Jews were excluded from many professions and social clubs. By 1930, for example, the Washington Athletic Club, Laurel Horse Country Club, Seattle Tennis Club, Rainier Club, all the like fancy schmancy clubs in Seattle excluded Jews, would not allow them to be members. The Jews made their own club and had a good time for themselves. In 1922, they started Glendale Golf and Country Club, and all of my mom's family was very involved in Glendale. Another thing that's really important to note is that all the minorities in Seattle, including the Jewish community, suffered from this thing called redlining, which meant that that from a real estate perspective, they were only allowed de facto to live in certain areas of the city because banks wouldn't give them a mortgage. And there were clauses in deeds that honestly stayed until the 1970s in Seattle. But there were clauses that says you cannot sell this property to someone who is Black, someone who is Native, someone who is Chinese or Japanese or Jewish. And so the Jews and other minorities were restricted to certain areas of the city. And for the Jewish community, it ended up being the Central District and parts of Capitol Hill. That is why you had an intense, strong Jewish community in those neighborhoods, because that's where they were allowed to be. Jews couldn't be lawyers or bankers or doctors. They were all closed to Jews in the city. Even until the 1950s, the sororities and fraternities at the University of Washington were closed to Jews. They made their own. Both my parents went to University of Washington, and there were Jewish fraternities and Jewish sororities, and they went to those, but they couldn't go to and they couldn't even think about going to another one. And when my dad in the late 1950s wanted to come back to live in Seattle after graduating as number 1 in the University of Washington Law School, and also graduating from an LLM program at New York University Law School, there were only 2 law firms that would even interview him to hire him. He did join one of those law firms and became a great Seattle lawyer, but that's something to note. This is the Singerman house again. I just love this picture, and it shows how people who came, these immigrants that came with nothing, really made it through their hard work. Their wealth didn't last through generations. It just didn't. It's a long story. Not so long, but you can read about it in the book. But their wealth didn't last even through one generation, but they made it in their own lives, and they became like an immigrant's dream, honestly. So go Paul and Jenny. That's what I say. Between 1900 and 1910, Seattle was a really hopping place. Downtown stretched from Jackson to Pike. There were electric lights everywhere, trolleys, electric trolleys going back and forth. Wallen Nordstrom's shoe store opened, beginning of Nordstrom's. Seattle Symphony started, King Street Station, Children's Hospital. And in 1909, the Yukon Pacific Expo, Seattle's first World's Fair, had 3 million visitors, really put Seattle on the map. This is a picture of the expo, and the expo created itself at the place that we now know as the University of Washington. And these buildings, which were built for the expo, were left for the university. This is the fountain and the buildings that are still there at the University of Washington. So to jump into the Friedlander's story, this is Sam and Augusta Friedlander. These pictures, I can't even describe the luck I had finding these photos. It was an amazing opportunity to find these. But they immigrated from Latvia as a married couple. They came to the United States 16 and 17 years old. That's crazy. They never saw their family again, but they settled in Rochester. Sam became a peddler. They had 2 children in Rochester, Louis and Anne. They ended up in Columbus for a little bit, but settled in Seattle in 1906 and started in partnership with a pawn shop in Gerald's Cafe, which I found this fantastic picture of Gerald's Cafe from First and Madison. And it's just really shows what that was like at the time. They graduated first to a small shop on First and Marion, and then to this larger shop in 1915, Friedlander and Sons. And if you can see this wonderful tower clock, a lot of jewelers commissioned a tower clock for their store. And it might be hard to see, but on the face of the clock, it has S. Friedlander and Son. And people, like, if you've been on Ben Bridge Jewelers, probably everybody knows, moved to 6th and Pike. And they took their tower clock with them. And the tower clock, of course, says Ben Bridge Jewelers. So all the jewelers had these amazing tower clocks that they took with them to the various locations that they were in. And Sam's son, Louis, joined his business here in this shop. But I want to focus now for a few minutes on Sam and Augusta living in West Seattle. They settled in West Seattle in 1916. Their first house was way down the peninsula, 2208 65th Avenue Southwest, half a block from the beach, but way down the peninsula. But then in 1926, they built an apartment house called the Friedlander Court. They called it after their name, which is right in the middle of the Alki Strip. It's right, like, kind of in the middle of it, and it's still there. I just want to I'm going to jump ahead just to a picture of Friedlander Court, and this is what it looks like. The whole thing looks like this from the other side of the street. You can see it's like a U-shaped 1-story brick building, but people live there, and I tried to get in to see one of the apartments, and I was unsuccessful. But from the outside, it looks totally beautiful and it's kept up really well. But this crazy thing I found on the outside of the building is that Sam and Augusta made this like weird coat of arms, like they wanted to be British or something. And this is still affixed to the outside of the building. So that's pretty weird, but I love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And then they moved to Capitol Hill for a bit. Then they moved back to West Seattle, and they built a house on Halleck Avenue Southwest, just a half block from the Friedlander Court. And then when Augusta died, Sam moved into the Playa Vista Apartments, which was very new at the time. He moved there in 1931. And I'll show you briefly, this is the Halleck home that's still there. I took this picture myself. And my aunt, Anne Friedlander, who lived until the 1970s, lived in this home until she died. And this is the Playa Vista Apartments, which is just on Bonaire Drive, just behind the Alki Way. And something that was really interesting to me about Alki's Jewish community, which today you may or may not know, there is a thriving Jewish community in West Seattle. Lots of people who attend synagogue services and have lots of really interesting programs that go on for the Jewish community there. But there's this plaque down, if you keep going down like the beach and you get towards the end of the peninsula, you will see, maybe some of you have seen it, there's a plaque on the ground that says, "Fleeing anti-Semitism in Russia and Eastern Europe, Jews were among the early pioneers who came to Seattle. A descendant of those early years, Lydia Pearl Offman, recalls spending summers on Alki Beach playing with American Indian children. She attended Salish ceremonies here at Duwamish Head and especially liked eating salmon cooked over the fire on a stick, which met with Jewish dietary laws of keeping kosher. And later, Lydia and her husband established the first synagogue in West Seattle in their own house, which became the center of a lively Jewish community in Alki. Pearl Street, if you're familiar with Pearl Street over there, is named for her family. So that's like just a tiny taste of the very early story of Alki and West Seattle's Jewish community, which, as I mentioned, is now a very thriving community. This is a picture of Sam Friedlander, the old bald guy, and his son Louis, and then my grandfather on the right, Jack Friedlander, and his brother Paul. In 1928, they moved to their store in Fifth and Pike. If you grew up in Seattle, you might have known that store, Fifth and Pike, Friedlander's Jewelry. It was this gorgeous jewelry store that was just a magical fairyland. But this picture captures like a moment in time when they were all involved in the mercantile jewelry business. I took my mother, it's my mother and her sister, Jackie Goldfarb, to the home, not Friedlander home, it's a Statiker home, but where their parents were married. And we went there and we knocked on the door and asked if we could come in. And we had a wonderful experience being present in the place where Jack Friedlander married Elizabeth Statiker. And that's Elizabeth Statiker with my mom as a baby. Gorgeous picture, really, honestly. And then this is my grandfather, Jack Friedlander, who I adored as a child, loved to no end. And he won a Jewelers Association award. This is that picture. And then time goes on, and my parents, Betty Lou Friedlander and Erwin Treiger, meet at the University of Washington, and they got married in 1958. And this is our family that they created. Me, of course, the only girl, my brother Louis, and my younger brother Ken, and my dad with his mustache, which is just so fantastic. And this is my picture of my dad, who died in 2013. And he was one of my heroes and really the inspiration for me to do this research and to write the book. And I miss him every day, but I really feel like he was with me as I did this work. He kind of sat next to me, and I'm not afraid to admit that I like talk to him sometimes. I'm like, Dad, here's what we're doing. And he was right there encouraging me the whole time, as he did while he was alive. He was the most encouraging father that I could possibly have had. This is a picture of the Treiger family in 2022. We were all together, but there are more spouses and more children, more grandchildren that have come into the family. And I want to just share this picture, which is my particular family. My mom's in the middle. I mentioned my mom is turning 90 on Sunday. And this is our 4 children. My spouse, Shlomo Goldberg, who's a doctor at Swedish. You might know him as Sheldon Goldberg. If you ever hopefully you haven't had cancer or a hematology problem. But these are our 6 grandchildren that were alive then, the 7th on the way. But I think I want to just share to close some of the values that I learned as I went along the way. And really, I learned the values of family, resilience, persistence, leadership, customer service, hard work, education, and bringing with you the Jewish tradition and history that we carry from ancient times. And what I want to convey to all of you is that I want you to become your family storyteller as I have become mine. That's my granddaughter, Coco, who loves to hear family stories, even though she's only 3 years old. And you can impact your family and your family's future by doing this work and sharing with them what are our stories and what are our values that we carry forward from those ancestors and from those stories. So thank you all for listening to my story. The book, if you want to read it, is available on barnesandnoble.com or in stores, and of course Amazon. KarenTreiger.com is my website, and you can look at that to get much more information about the book and also about my previous book. But I'm now very open and excited to see what your questions are and try to answer them. Thank you all for being good listeners.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. I'm trying to turn on the video. The very first question is asking about, are those palm trees we saw at the Singerman home?
I think so. Like it's a crazy house. You should go by 15th and see it. They planted palm trees, and palm trees, I guess, can thrive in Seattle. So yeah, I think that's right.
All right. I think the audience usually waiting till closer to 7 to start asking questions. I don't know. I have no other questions.
Well, I'm very happy to tell more stories, or you guys can chime in when you want. But I'll tell you some interesting stories about my grandfather, who was the Friedlander. Obviously, I didn't know Sam Friedlander, and I didn't know Louis Friedlander. Although my older brother Louis, is named for him. And I found out in my research that my brother Louis, who is my older brother, who we're very close, he lives just like down the block from where I live here in Seward Park in Seattle. He was born, he won't mind if I tell you, he was born on January 3rd, 1959. He's 2 years older than I am. But my great-grandfather, Louis Friedlander, died exactly 5 years before, on January 3rd. And that was gave me the chills when I learned that. And I called him. I'm like, Louis, the person you're named for died on your exact birth date. And he was like, what? So I found these really crazy things when I was doing this research. And some of the really interesting things that happened is my grandfather, Jack, and his wife, Elizabeth, who got divorced, they didn't get along. It was a terrible marriage, but they ended up building a house in Magnolia. And my mom and I went to that house in Magnolia, and we knocked on the door. I did this quite often, actually, knock on the door. Hi, I'm Karen. Can I come in your house? And honestly, every single person that I did that to was like, of course you can. I'm like, there I am with my 89-year-old mother saying she grew up in this house. Can she come in? What are they gonna say? So they let us in. And then my mom kind of gave me this beautiful memory tour of this house, which was in Magnolia with a beautiful view of the bay. Of course, if you're on that side of Magnolia Hill, you have a beautiful view, and you could see right across to West Seattle. And as I looked across and really thought about the history that these families lived, I said to my mom, I'm like, Mom, you can see right across to West Seattle where your great grandparents lived, and she was like, yeah, I never thought about that before. And it was just so fascinating to be there and hear what little bit of what she experienced growing up in that home, and then thinking about how her grandparents lived in Capitol Hill, but her great grandparents lived in West Seattle, and you could just see straight across the bay to West Seattle from Magnolia. And it just brought all that history just kind of collapsed into time. And I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you, feel free to share it in the chat. But that happened to me at that moment, where the moment that I was in collapsed to, 80 years before. And there I was in that moment in time. And so those are some of the things that I experienced when I was doing the research. And it was very powerful. And my grandfather was quite a character. He was very active in Seattle's Jewish community, in Seattle's civic community, and in the Seattle's jewelers community. He was known as being an honest businessman. In fact, the title of the book, Standing on the Crack, comes from him, because in Friedlander's, that store on Fifth Avenue that I mentioned, it was this beautiful store, and I would go there as a child. I worked there as a teenager. I worked there every summer. But my grandfather would stand right in the front as you entered. There was marble floor, and there was a crack on the marble floor. And he would stand on that crack. And he used to tell us, he used to talk with a very deep, gruff voice, you can't sell anything from the back office. You got to stand on the crack. And so this idea of standing on the crack became this family metaphor of like being an honest, upright business person and a warm and welcoming person to anybody who enters your space, whether it's your business space, your home space, or your mental space. Like the idea of being present and welcoming and sincere in who you are became a family value. And it was, the mantra was standing on the crack. And so that's why I named the book Standing on the Crack.
Is that your second book? First book?
This is my second book. I published my first book in 2018. It's called My Soul is Filled with Joy, a Holocaust Story. And as I mentioned, it's about my husband's, my spouse's parents' story of survival during World War II and the Holocaust. They lost their whole families. They were the only ones to survive. And it was very important to me to have their story be part of history. And that was what motivated me to do that. And then again, like I said, thinking about after my dad died and how much he wanted to write this family history, that motivated me to take, really devote 4 years of my life to this project, which is now I've given birth to. So there you go.
That is great. Pearl McElleran asked that question about the name of your latest book. Prior, a little bit before that, Jerome Cohen is acknowledging the lot of hard work that you put into this, Karen. Fantastic, he says.
Is that Jerome Cohen who knew my dad?
Yeah, it had to be.
Jerry, is that you who is good friends with Erwin Treiger?
We'll see if he answers here.
Let's see if he answers.
Yeah, here he says, he said he walks by the Friedlander court every day. He had relatives that lived there.
Wait, you have relatives? If someone has relatives that live there, can you send me a note from my contact sheet on my website? Because I would love to go in there. If you have somebody who'd be willing to let me go in and see, send me a note on my website contact page, because I really want to go inside there.
Okay, he better follow through. He also says he went to the Ottoman Minyan synagogue and knew the Offmans.
Oh, the Offmans. Oh, that's wonderful. So you've obviously been in West Seattle for a long time. That's fantastic.
That's neat that you guys can connect this way. Virginia Simpson says, what were places besides the UW that you used to research your family? And this is asked by one of your high school math teachers.
No way. That's
Virginia
crazy.
Simpson.
Well, thank you for teaching me math in high school. I went on to be a lawyer and did quite well. So the University of Washington was great. Their archives were great, but Ancestry.com and all the genealogy websites were amazingly fantastic in Seattle. Also, Mohi has an amazing photo collection where I found so many great old photos that were relevant to my family. But also even just the Seattle Times, the PI, their archives, and the Seattle Jewish Transcript, which actually didn't start until 1928. So Singerman, I didn't find anything about Singerman there because he died in 1915. But other families, I found a ton in these newspaper archives. And I spent hours like looking at these tiny entries of like the newspaper and what was there. But so I would say like the most important things were going into the street myself, the University of Washington, Mohi, Ancestry, and other genealogy websites, and the newspaper archives were really critical. At the end of my book, I have an appendix where I put like, okay, if you want to know like kind of how to get started, here's some ideas. And so because I wanted to make my book not just a story about my family, but also like you can follow me along and learn how I found some of the information that I found in case that you want to try that yourself. So I really tried not to make it like a step-by-step how-to book, but on the way, as you go along with me on my journey, I try to articulate how I found different pieces of information so that you can try that as well.
That's a great idea. Great. People can follow through on that. Deborah Alderman asks, whatever happened to the clock tower you talked about?
So, I did research into the Friedlander clock tower, and there's this man whose name I forget right now, but who's written a bunch of articles about Seattle's clock towers and especially the jewelers' clock towers. And he wrote to me and he said that he traced the Friedlander clock towers and he knows who owns one of them. There were two. He knows who owns one of them. Do I want to contact him to try to buy it? And I'm like, no. I asked my mom, I'm like, Mom, do you want to try to buy the clock tower? And she's like, no, I don't want to buy the clock tower. So I gave it up. But there are, if you just go to Google and you just put in Seattle's history of Seattle's clock towers, you'll find not like millions of articles, but you'll find like 3 or 4, mostly by this one guy. His name is, it's something like, I'm going to say it wrong, so I apologize. Something like Catcher, like I want to say ketchup, but that's not right. It's like Ketcherman or something like that. He wrote a number. He's done a ton of research on the clock towers. The person who made all the clock towers was actually a Jewish man named Jacob Myers, who came to Seattle at the age of 15 in the late 1880s, and he had been an apprentice to learn how to make watches and repair watches, but he came here and he decided that he was going to make clock towers, and he became the clock tower maker, and everybody who got a clock tower got it from him. So that's the history of it is really fascinating, and it was a really fun kind of rabbit hole to go down in my research.
That's super. You are a good storyteller, Karen.
Oh, thank you.
Pearl McElleran said, thanks. You gave her the name of your last book. She says she's got that now, but she has already read My Soul is Filled with Joy.
Thank you.
Super. Jerome
I hope
Cohen,
it was meaningful. It's a very different book. I cried a lot when I was writing that book because the story is hard. This book, I didn't cry so much. I more laughed and had a good time. So it was fun for me to shift to a story that was more Seattle based and involved like my own childhood. And it was very fun for me to research and write this book.
That's great. A lot of stories and a lot of lives are filled with both of those emotions, right?
Yes, exactly.
Jerome Cohen says yes in response to something you asked earlier, or said
thank you.
And then he said, not now, long ago. And I don't remember.
Oh, I see your relatives that lived in Friedlander Court. If anybody knows anybody that lives there, let me know. I want to get in there.
Oh, okay, cool. Steve and Diane Loeb said, thank you, Karen. They love Steve and Diane.
Nice. I'm so happy that you came. We've been friends. Steve and I have been friends since we were born.
Oh, cool. They love your photos, and they've probably seen some of them before, or two, maybe. So we have a little story here from the Pampered Parrot behavior coaching person, who tells you, my family arrived in Seattle in the 1880s, related to Althea and Sam Strom, Stroum. Family was in junk business selling scrap metal during World War I, owned most of the harbor island, but lost everything during the Great Depression. They have an important letter from Mr. Further, a banker who saved many Jewish families.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Her name is Suzanne Crum.
Thank you.
The lady that, yes, related to Althea and Sam.
Althea and Sam, like side story, Althea and Sam, before they died, obviously, lived in one of the penthouse apartments in First Hill Plaza, which is where my mom lives. And so, of course, they were in the same building as my mom and dad for quite a number of years. I mean, of course, I've known Althea and Sam my whole life, but it was fun to have them in the same building as my parents for some number of years.
Oh, that's a nice connection. Yeah. Deborah Alderman says, if you put your request out to the folks who run the West Seattle blog, they might be able to help you connect with the people who live at a Friedlander Court.
So you know what? If you could just send me a note about how to do that, I would totally do that. Send me a note. Go to my website, KarenTreiger.com. Write a note to me, and I would, if that's the way to go, I'm in. I'm totally in.
Yeah, sounds like you'll be there one way or another.
I really hope so.
That's great. That's the last question right now. There might be another one or two. We've got a few minutes. If you'd like to add something that these questions have made you think about.
I think that these questions were wonderful, and thank you all for sharing your own stories. I would say that, like, what this research did for me was the world that we all live in is very fast paced and very intense. I know that's like, it's an understatement, I know, but doing this research about my families and writing this book about my ancestors, and of course then about me, and put my own self into the story, really made me, I can't say I'm calm about the nervousness I experience in the world and the nervousness I have for my grandchildren going forward in the world, which I do. But it allowed me to have a sense of the people that came before me were these really interesting, successful and not successful, fantastic and flawed people at the same time. And that I myself am a really wonderful person, but also flawed, just like they were, and trying my best to do something important in the world during my time on the planet. But I get hope from the fact that as we carry forward the traditions and the stories of our city and of our families and of our traditions, that we can pass that to our children and our grandchildren, and that it gives me hope for the future, that they too will have values that will center them, to bring them back to a place of meaning and a place of saying, what is my purpose in life? What am I doing here on this planet during the, let's say, 90 or 100 years that hopefully I might have here? And it gives me hope for the future, that sometimes feels not so hopeful. So I gain this, like, hopefulness when I think about how my ancestors also had some hard times. I also had some hard times. We all have hard times, and our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will have hard times, but they will succeed in finding meaning in their lives and finding a meaningful things that they can do, to make the world a better place. So that's something that I just share with everyone on the call, and hope that those feelings can be transferred to all of you as well. Oh, Dorothy, we can't hear you.
How it comes together in your writing, and it could in other people's stories as well.
Yeah.
So thank you, Karen, and thank you, audience, for being with us. I'm going to get that book. I have not, read that. Is it on in the stores?
You can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, and some of Elliott Bay Books is carrying it. Many of the third place books are carrying it. But yeah, it's out in the world. It's out.
Lot of history there.
If you like audiobooks, be patient. The audiobook is going to be done mid-September.
Oh, all right. That'll be quicker on then. All right.
Yeah, mid-September. You can. I'll if you want to be on my. I do a blog every week or every other week. If you want to receive my blog posts, send me a note on my contact form on my website, KarenTreiger.com. Easy to remember. And I'll add you to my blog. And there I will for sure, or you can do my social media as well. But I have Facebook and Instagram are the primary places. Blue Sky also. I'm not doing X, so sorry if you're any X fans. But anyway, I will announce, of course, when the audiobook comes out. But it'll be approximately mid-September. If you're a lot of people I love audiobooks, and it's very important for me to have this as an audiobook. And I've got a really great narrator who's working on it, but it will be ready in mid-September.
Super. Well, congratulations on that new book. Thank you again very much for all your history and the love for your family and the Seattle area. That came out tonight too.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed.
I'm glad you and I met this way, and I hope to see you again.
I hope so. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And I hope, I can't see your faces, but I'm imagining them, and they're beautiful. Thank you.
And yours is as well. Bless you and have a good evening. We'll
Thanks.
see you again.
All right,
Thank
bye.
you. Good night, everybody. Thanks for being here.